Welcome to our Friday edition of COVID-19. I'm Min San-hee. Korea recorded no domestic cases of the virus on Thursday, as all 4 new cases yesterday were imported. Today, the country saw 1 domestic case and 8 imported infections. Now, despite this trend, health authorities are calling on members of the public to be cautious as cluster infections remain a concern. Here now are the headlines with our Kwon So-ah and Noaram.
Hi.
So we'll start with you. The figures for the domestic front.
Well, it was Buddha's birthday yesterday, so I think we should take a look at the figure from yesterday first, because it was a really significant day as we only had 4 new cases. And what's even more significant is that none of these cases were domestic cases. All of them were imported cases. So in overall, this week looked like this. If we take a look here at our table, at our graph that is, we began the work week with 10 new cases and then had a slight rise the following day. And then for 3 consecutive days, we were in the single digit. And now we're having 9 new confirmed cases this Friday. And it's also noticeable that 8 out of today's 9 cases are reported as imported cases, so only 1 domestic infection. And with that, we have a total of 10,774 cases here in Korea. As of 12 a.m., another person was reported dead from the infection, and the number of people remaining in isolation stands at 1,454, and 9,072 people have been discharged from hospital so far.
Now, despite those figures, we are on the 2nd day of a 6-day holiday, and I understand authorities here are emphasizing that is the importance of social distancing.
Right. Authorities are stressing, reminding the nation's people that the stabilized figures we're seeing right now are the result of the strict social distancing measures that have been in effect for weeks. So thankfully, there has not been a single COVID-19 case related to the general elections, which means now the next crucial phase is the golden holiday. And Vice Health Minister Kim Gang-nip called on the people to continue with complying with social distancing during the holiday to maintain, quote, hard-won gains against COVID-19, adding we should think of the medical workers still fighting against the virus. Following the end of the holiday, beginning next Wednesday, state-run museums, art centers, and libraries are to be gradually reopened, starting with 24 facilities. Visitors at museums and similar culture attractions will be asked to take tours alone and make pre-reservations. Meanwhile, the Vice Health Minister also said following the National Assembly's approval of a 12.2 trillion won or $10 billion emergency relief fund Thursday, 2.7 million households in the low-income bracket will begin to receive emergency money in cash to their bank accounts beginning May 4th. That would be Monday.
I see. On the global front, I understand Indonesia is seeing a surge in the number of confirmed cases.
Right. Indonesia, being the largest country in Southeast Asia, has become the next country to surpass 10,000 cases. According to Indonesia's health ministry, the country had 347 new infections on Thursday local time, with 8 new deaths, and the death toll is now approaching 800. Earlier this week on Tuesday, the nation reported the highest daily increase with 415 new cases. It is, however, one of the countries that's lacking testing kits for the virus, suggesting actual figures are even higher. And so far, 72,300 people have been tested. Now, where the situation looks a bit better is Malaysia, which is getting ready to reopen the majority of businesses in the country beginning next week, apart from sectors that involve gatherings of people in large numbers. Malaysia has more than 6,000 total cases as of Thursday, with a little over 100 deaths in total. And now let's get a look at how the situation looks in other places around the world. The total number of infections in the U.S. accounts for almost a third of the world's cases, with more than 63,000 deaths, and followed by Spain and Italy in total cases. And the U.K. has now reported more cases than France, and Russia's infections reached past the 10,000 mark recently as well. And in total, more than 3.3 million people around the world have been tested positive with the virus, with 234,000 deaths, and a little more than 1 million people have now fully recovered.
I see. All right. So thank you for that. I'll get back to you after the afternoon briefing. Meanwhile, Aram, despite a slowdown in cases, health officials are not letting their guard down and they're looking to get everyone tested.
That's right. We mentioned before on the show about this antibody testing and that it was in the works and the government was planning to carry it out. And it appears the government is accelerating efforts to do that. The government is working to get every citizen tested for antibodies to see the exact scale of the COVID-19 infections, as there are suspicions that the official numbers are an undercount. So we could actually have realistically more numbers than reported. Antibody tests can see whether a person has ever had COVID-19 if he or she did not have any symptoms or if they were unaware of it. The government also wants to know how much of the population have built immunity to the virus, as there is currently no vaccine or treatment. So they want to get a scale of how many people are in this kind of herd immunity that we've been talking about before. And as testing every citizen is almost impossible, the government will carry out testing on a sample of 10,000 people in 192 districts and regions and compare the data with national health surveys to get a better picture.
I see. Now, the race for a COVID-19 vaccine continues, and a U.S. health expert believes a vaccine might be available in the near future.
That's right. The Dr. Anthony Fauci, whose name we've been hearing a lot from the US, says it's not out of the question that the United States could have millions of viable coronavirus vaccines by January. He was speaking on NBC's Today Show and noted that the ideal plan for a potential vaccine is to ensure it is safe and effective and can be rapidly scaled up for distribution. As for treating patients right now, Fauci, speaking at the White House, was optimistic the antiviral drug remdesivir could be approved very quickly. Some say even by the week's end. It could be approved by the FDA. He was speaking after promising results from the first major study into the effectiveness of the drug, which showed a drastic reduction in recovery time, about 31% reduction to be precise. But he did warn that the new treatment would be a first step and is not a miracle solution to end the pandemic.
Right. Global praise for Korea's COVID-19 response continues, and the UN chief has also joined in.
That's right. Antonio Guterres said Korea has shown a remarkable example in its extremely successful response to the coronavirus pandemic. He also praised Korea for combating the outbreak while simultaneously fighting climate change. Now, under a so-called Green Deal, Korea has put together what Guterres called very ambitious plans for a post-coronavirus economic recovery, which include a reduction of emissions as well as coal-fired power plants. He added that eradication of the virus, coupled with an environmentally friendly, socially inclusive economic recovery, is an example that countries around the world should follow.
All right, Aram, thank you for that. Have a safe weekend. We'll see you on Monday.
You too. Thank you.
Right, it's time now for the regular afternoon briefing by the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure Headquarters. Chung Eun-kyung, the head of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, is poised to head the briefing on this Friday. As mentioned at the start of the program, Korea recorded no domestic cases of the virus on Thursday, as all 4 new cases yesterday were imported. Today, the country saw 1 domestic case and 8 imported infections. Now, despite this rather promising trend, health authorities are calling for caution within members of the public as cluster infections remain a concern, especially in light of the large movement of people here to make most of the current golden holiday period. Travelers to the southern resort island of Jeju and others to the East Sea and elsewhere are being advised to refrain from spending time in crowded indoor spaces and to practice good personal hygiene, as well as to wear their face masks. Now, we are still waiting for the briefing by the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure Headquarters. We still have about a minute, I think, and while we're waiting for that, perhaps, no, I understand she is here to give us a briefing. We'll be back after this.
First, here is Chief Chung Eun-kyung with the briefing. Let us now begin our regular briefing on the coronavirus. And as of today, May 1st, the total number of confirmed cases stands at 10,774. This includes 1,073 imported cases. And of the total, 84.2% or 9,072 have been discharged following full recovery. Yesterday, we had 9 more cases, and 13 more people were released after fully recovering from the hospitals. Yesterday, we had one additional fatality. I extend my deepest condolences to the deceased and the members of the bereaved family. Yesterday, we had 9 new cases, and among them, we had 8 imported cases and 1 domestic case. Looking at the sources of infection during the past 2 weeks, the imported cases accounted for 64%, and 1.4% were related to the contacts of the imported cases, and it means that about 65% of the total are related to imported cases. And centering around nursing hospitals and hospitals, we had 10% and about 9.4% on the cluster infections, and also there are a total of 9 infections, which account for about 6.5%, which are still undergoing investigation. We had 8 imported cases, 3 from the Americas, 1 from Europe, 2 from India, and 2 from Japan. Yesterday's cases are as follows. In the Gyeongbuk province, Yecheon-gun County, we also identified 1 more person who was tested positive, and this makes a total to 41 as for the Yecheon-gun cluster infection. And the person who was tested positive was the parents of a child who was taken care of by the nursery center's teacher who also tested positive. And during the weekend, we also advised the religious circles to abide by the quarantine guidelines. And as for the religious facilities, we advise you to still have the online streaming services instead of physical contacts. And even if you have to have physical services, please have about 2-meter distance, and please refrain from choir or chants that may increase the risk of droplet infections. And as for the high-risk categories, who are pregnant women, those with chronic illnesses, and senior citizens, we advise you not to visit crowded indoor places. And we also advise the public to refrain from visiting the nightlife venues which have a very lack of ventilation services. And for the other nightlife venues that are still open, we advise you to have a ventilation as well. And aside from these businesses, we also advise you to refrain from gatherings where it's crowded and it's enclosed. And if you have to visit these places, please have 2-meter distance and wear your masks and wash your hands and refrain from touching your face with contaminated hands. Starting from yesterday, we are having this long week of a holiday, and we know that a lot of people are moving around the country. And when you are traveling, we advise you to abide by the quarantine guidelines. Before departing on your travels, make sure that you don't have any symptoms of fever or runny nose or sneezing or cough, and refrain from any traveling. And if you have to be on traveling, please refrain from group tours and travel in small family units in personal vehicles. And while ticketing, please use the online services instead of waiting up on the ticket booth. And please refrain from crowded places. And while you are enjoying your traveling schedules, please wash your hands thoroughly and refrain from going to crowded places. And when you are standing standing in a queue or when you are with large gatherings of people, please have a 2-meter distance with each other. And please your own personal vehicle. And if you have to use the public transportation, please wear your protective face masks. When you are visiting dining centers, restaurants, or resting places and cafes, please refrain from using these facilities during crowded times and have physical distance amongst others. And please refrain from talking amongst each other when you are staying in these facilities. And also take use of takeout services. And when you go to shopping malls or other indoor facilities, please wear your face masks. And even if you are in enclosed spaces, please remember to wear your face masks at all times. And please refrain from shouting, singing where there could be an increased risk of droplet infection, and refrain from other physical contact, including shaking of hands and hugs. And after returning from your travel, if you have symptoms like fever or a cough, please refrain from going to work and stay at home for the next 3 to 4 days. And if you have aggravating symptoms, you should call KCDC call center or contact a local public health center or visit a screening clinic to get tested as early as possible. Moreover, we are seeing a decrease in the number of newly confirmed cases, hovering around 10, and 65% of the daily infections are related to imported cases. And we know that we are under control. We are controlling the COVID-19 situations to a certain extent. However, we shall not become complacent. We shall always remember that there are silent infections of the COVID-19, and we should be fully aware of this. As you saw in the Yecheon-gun County, one infection could lead to friends and colleagues and your neighbors and kindergartens. And when you have close contact, everyone could be the victims of COVID-19 infections. And most of the people have minor symptoms. However, the infection rate is very high and very fast. And the COVID-19 has two phases, and so we call it a two-faced virus, meaning that in healthy young people, it only has minor symptoms. However, it is very fatal to the senior citizens. And the fatality rate here in Korea is about 2.3% on average. However, for those over the age of 40 is 24%, meaning that 1 out of 4 people. And for those about in the 70s, the fatality rate is about 10%, which is a very high figure. And as for the citizens, senior citizens, especially with chronic illnesses, they need to be protected by the rest of the family members. And for the sake of not only your health and safety, you need to protect the safety and health of your families. And so please refrain from having close contact with other people, and please continue to practice social distancing going forward and wearing of your face mask. Thank you very much.
Right, and that was the government's afternoon briefing on the COVID-19 situation here in Korea. And I have Soa to give us a summary of the key announcements.
All right. Well, today's focus was on the decrease in people contracting the virus within the country, because we only had 1 domestic case out of 9 cases today. And yesterday, as you mentioned before, we had 0 cases that were domestic infections. So KCDC Chief Jung Eun-kyung said that 65% of the total cases are related to overseas cases in the past couple of weeks. So that is still a concern. And she also stressed that the infection rate of the virus is high and fast. And that is why we should still, abide by the social distancing measures. And especially this golden holiday, on the weekend, she asked for religious services to be online streamed. Even if they do have physical services, they must follow special recommendations recommendations. And also she gave some guidelines for the holiday period. For instance, using your own vehicle when you travel and try to wear face masks whenever you can and refrain from group tours, and also make use of online reservations such as when you are purchasing tickets, and also try to avoid going to rest areas because we know they are bustling with people at this time of the year.
All right, so thank you for that. We'll see you on Monday.
Thank you.
Now, earlier this week, the leaders of Korea and Austria spoke on the phone about the former's response to the COVID-19 pandemic and about ways of sharing know-how to curb the contagion amid Austria's plans to lift its travel ban on Korea. Now, for a glimpse of the situation in Austria, let's take a look at this video.
안녕하세요. 주 오스트리아 한인회 39대 회장 임창로입니다. (4월 14일부터) 식당 등 서비스업을 제외한 조그만 점포의 영업을 허가했고 5월 1일부터는 외출 금지령이 해제됩니다. 공장, 사무실 등 일반 기업의 업무가 재개되고 대규모 점포, 백화점 등의 영업도 허가됩니다. 이를 허가한 가장 중요한 이유는 일일 신규 확진자 수가 100명 정도로 줄었기 때문이겠지만 경제를 활성화시켜 나가야 한다는 필요성이 더욱 컸기 때문입니다. 코로나19의 여파로 오스트리아의 실업률은 ILO 기준으로 2월 말 4.9%에서 3월 말 9%로 급격히 상승했으며 계속 증가할 것으로 예측됩니다. 실업급여는 실업자의 조건에 따라 다르기는 하나 해고되기 전 직장에서 받던 수령액의 약 60% 정도를 받습니다. 오스트리아는 코로나19 대책을 안정적으로 잘 해나가고 있고 실업수당 제도가 잘 되어 있습니다. 또한 기업들도 이제 본격적으로 영향을 받기 시작하는 단계여서 아직까지 여론은 현 정부의 호의적인 것 같습니다. (3월 10일) 이후 여행 자제령, 국경 폐쇄 등이 발표되면서 여행객의 숫자도 급격히 줄었습니다. 이와 같은 위기는 처음입니다. 원래는 성수기에 접어들어 바빠야 할 시기인데 올 연말까지 문의나 예약이 하나도 없습니다. 이 모든 일들이 갑작스럽게 닥친 것이어서 아직도 얼떨떨한 상황이고요. 지난 2, 3월 마스크 구하기가 워낙 어려워 마스크를 찾는 한인들이 많아졌습니다. 수요를 파악해보니 가격 면에서도 한인회에서 공동 구입하는 것이 한인들에게 유리하다고 판단해 지난 3월 구입을 결정했습니다. 지난주 주문하신 분들에게 마스크를 건네드렸고 현재와 같은 오스트리아 한인회가 만들어질 수 있도록 노력해주신 원로회 회원분들과 어린 새싹들을 위해 고생하시는 한글학교 선생님들에게는 기증을 했습니다. 해외에서 긴급 상황이 생기면 서로 의지하고 문제를 풀어갈 곳은 한인들의 공동체인 한인회, 그리고 대한민국 정부의 대표기관인 대사관이라는 것을 절실히 피부로 느끼는 계기가 되었습니다.
We are facing a catastrophic situation, the most serious crisis after World War II. That is what the ILO, the International Labour Organization, said in relation to the COVID-19 affecting global employment. The ILO said that the COVID-19 crisis is expected to wipe out 6.7% of working hours globally in the second quarter of 2020. For the first time in 40 years, China suffered a severe contraction and recorded minus growth in the first quarter of 2020. More than 22 million people have filed for unemployment aid in the past month in the United States. The COVID-19 related damages in the job market in Korea show through the economic indicators. Last month, the number of jobs at companies saw a decrease. This is an unprecedented case and a first since records began in 2009.
일자리 위기가 세계에 닥쳐오고 있지만 정부는 하나의 일자리로 반드시 지키겠다는 그런 각오로 여러분과 함께 할 것입니다.
COVID-19 is threatening employment all over the world. What kind of employment measures will we see in the near future?
May 1st, that is today, is International Workers' Day, a day to mark the efforts of workers across the globe. Now, this year, the commemorations come at a particularly difficult time as a global pandemic casts a dark cloud over the labour market. In fact, some 80% of the world's workers look to be affected by COVID-19. For more on this dismal reality, I have Professor Song Soo-young from Chungang University. Welcome, Professor Song.
Thank you for inviting me.
And I have a journalist, Stanislav Varivoda from the Russian news agency TASS. Welcome, Stan.
Thank you.
Professor Song, we'll start with you then. The International Labour Organization has claimed that the recent global health pandemic is now a major labour market crisis. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, first, according to the report, we have witnessed some serious setback and the reduction of the employment. Currently, the total, first let me start with some growth rate of the GDP. Well, particularly the European countries have suffered so much from the negative growth rate for the first quarter of 2020. So, however, in United States, the annualized growth rate of GDP of reduction has reached 4.48%. In South Korea is a 5.5% of the decline of the GDP growth rate, but much worse in the European countries, in France and Italy and Spain, and those countries has reached almost less than 20% of the growth rate, GDP growth rate decline. That is annualized. So first quarter and calculate the annualized growth rate is reduction. So that. To that regard, that is a really serious setback, and then according to the unemployment rate, will be reduced by almost 20%. That is a really serious crisis.
Right, which is why the International Monetary Fund on the economic front believes that the economic crisis, will be the worst one since the Great Depression. I'm assuming you share this sentiment.
Yeah, I think we have seen three great economic failure sisters. Well, we have a Great Depression in 1930s and a Great Recession in 2008, and right now we have a Great Lockdown. I think Great Lockdown would be the worst case, and most economists has predicted. Even though there are some exceptions that some optimistic view is out there, but I don't think so, because of the effect of this coronavirus is really sustained for the next January, until the dramatic success of the development of the vaccine against the coronavirus. But I think it's not most unlikely to happen soon.
Stan, let's start in Russia. I understand the Prime Minister there has tested positive for COVID-19.
Yeah, that's what he announced just today.
I see. And the President, Vladimir Putin, has signed an executive order appointing the first Deputy Prime Minister, Andrei Belousov, is it, as acting PM?
Yes,
That's
correct.
True. Why are the numbers in Russia surging?
Well, experts say that there may be several reasons for that. Well, let me just explain the situation. For now, Russia has more than 100,000 cases, and almost half of them, and even more than half of them, are concentrated in Moscow and Moscow region. So the situation is quite similar with what happens in New York right now. And other major cities are also influenced, but the Moscow is still the biggest infection hub. So the experts say that the infection spreads in highly densely populated areas, because You know, Moscow and most of the Russian cities, those living quarters consist of high-rise buildings where people live compactly, and that makes the situation, you know, that gives a perfect conditions for the spread of the virus. And also, some people are still not cautious and not conscious about the gravity of the situation. So some of them break the social distancing rules, etc. We still have those cases. And I hope the situation will change, but it's been it's been only 1 month since the pandemic started in Russia.
I see. Stan, as Professor Sung mentioned, the unemployment reality, it's a global reality right now. I'm assuming it's also quite dismal in Russia. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, Russia is also under a lockdown. Not the entire territory of Russia, but major cities, including Moscow. People are only allowed to go out for twice a week to buy some products or medicine and for other businesses. The outbreak in Russia started in late March, and it did not affect the jobless rate in March, obviously. But we still do not have the data for April. The government predicts that it is going to jump from current 4.5% to about 8 or 10% during this year. And that would affect from 6 to 10 million people. And this situation will continue at least until the end of the year. So, and the Russian economy is also is forecasted to plunge to between -4 to -6% during this year due to the impact of coronavirus. And the other big problem for Russia is the oil prices plunge, because Russian export mainly consists of gas and oil. So it's going to put a lot of pressure on the Russian budget and government and the Russian citizens, obviously. So it's going to be a very tough year.
Right. We'll get back to that soon. Meanwhile, as yet another tangible indication of the severity of the labor market across the globe, findings by the United States show its unemployment rate will, or may reach, that is, 20% by next month, as it struggles to deal with almost 1/3 of the world's infections. For more on the situation in the US, I have Professor Jean-Paul Rodrigue from Hofstra University. Hello, Professor Rodrigue.
Good afternoon.
And I have labor law attorney Charles Krugel. Welcome to the program, Mr. Krugel.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Professor Rodrigue, I understand that Americans have been filing claims for unemployment benefits in record numbers. Now, in fact, jobless claims surged to more than 3.8 million in the week ending on the 25th of April. Now, the previous high was 695,000 set during the recession in 1982. What are your thoughts, Professor?
The first thing you have to keep in mind that these figures are somewhat artificial. What I mean by this is unemployment filings are essentially furloughs with the expectation that once this crisis is over, that people are going to go back to their previous job. So from one perspective, those figures are artificial, and eventually people are going to go back to work again. But the problem is, and the big risk is, the longer this lasts, the more likely that temporary job losses are going to become permanent in several sectors, as companies, especially small businesses, are declaring bankruptcy because they can no longer pay rent, they can no longer pay their debt. And that's essentially what it's likely going to happen in the United States over the next month or so. And the month of May is likely to be a critical month where temporary unemployment could become permanent in several economic sectors.
Mr. Krugel, you're an attorney specializing in labor law. How do you assess the current state of affairs?
It's a disaster here. Like it was just pointed out, we're looking at potentially 20% unemployment rate in the U.S. and lots of people are losing their jobs. And I think also when you're looking at the aftermath of this, there's going to be possibly a period of wage deflation where people will be making a lot less money than they were before. So right now we have the government who stepped in to help buffer things and support things, but that's going to be temporary.
Professor Arirang, hardships in the U.S. economy is likely to translate into hardships for many economies worldwide. Do you agree?
Quite sure. Here's the issue. For the last 30 years or so, American consumption, especially imports, have been driving a lot of the globalization process. That is, the U.S. negative trade balance was essentially a subsidy for the global economy and the global labor market. And now the sentiment has shifted quite dramatically with the current context. And actually, this simply is an evolution of what the current administration was trying to push around the world, that is more trade protectionism. And I suspect that this current crisis is going to create a major paradigm shift in the American economy, and the American demand for foreign goods is very likely to decline. We are already observing that in port traffic, which have plummeted in recent weeks by the matter, depending upon the port, but 25 to 30% decline in container port volumes. So that's going to be a very big risk, and American companies are going to reshore. There's going to be rules and regulations that are going to prevent outsourcing and offshoring outside the United States. That's probably going to happen within the next few months or so.
Mr. Krugel, as part of efforts to protect the interests of American workers, U.S. President Donald Trump imposed a 60-day ban on the issuing of green cards for people looking to permanently work and live in the U.S. What are the repercussions, perhaps, of this ban?
I don't think that it's going to be very intense in terms of repercussions. I think a lot of this was basically to play to his base. It was political. So we're not really, you're going to still see workers coming in, especially for agricultural and other essential jobs. So I think a lot of this was just cosmetic.
Professor Arirang, you're a geoeconomist. Can you tell us about other countries that are also likely to be heavily affected by the pandemic?
When you look at this, I tend to look at this more from a sectorial analysis than a country analysis. What I mean by this is anything related to discretionary consumption is going to, I would say, face a serious setback. So which means that some countries that were depending upon the production of apparel, for instance, and let's say low-cost electronic devices, and even durable goods, are going to suffer for a while a very significant decline in their demand. So that's what my expectation, that anything which is low value is going to be facing, I would say, a vanishing of the demand, including everything which is related to the tourism and the travel industry, which is going to take quite a while to recuperate.
Mr. Krugel, speaking within your capacity as a labor law attorney, what are some words of advice to ensure perhaps a gradual recovery in the job market?
Well, I think we're going to have to gradually reopen the economy. I don't think it could be, it's not like pulling off a Band-Aid or something like that. We're going to have to do it in stages, and we're going to have, the government's still going to have to come in and support a lot of the economy, a lot of workers who are unemployed, especially at the middle and lower classes of society. Without that type of government support, it's just going to get much worse. This is going to potentially take years to work out, to resolve.
Professor Arirang, how long do you believe the current hardships will persist, and what are your words of advice in the meantime?
Currently, the situation is becoming untenable. We're reaching a critical point where supply chains, the demand is vanishing, and the more we wait, the longer it's going to take to restart this. And there's going to be a long lagging effect. So that's a very big risk. The positive sign is, like many places around the world, the United States is starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and there start to be signs of reopening. It's gradual, but this is going to be staged over a matter of weeks, if not months. I don't expect until mid-June, July, to see something returning back to some sign of normalcy. So that's one issue. However, we have also to have a positive side about this. Since this is creating a very uncertain economic context, it's going to also create opportunities, new economic sector, new practices, maybe new forms of demand, new forms of e-commerce is benefiting tremendously from this. Actually, in the United States, there's been a surge. Amazon has been hiring close to 100,000 workers. So when this happens, we're going to see actually a new economic paradigm, a new form of works, a new form of practices that's going to have very, I would say, I hope so, positive impacts.
I see. All right, Professor Arirang and Mr. Krugel, thank you very much for making the time to join us live from the U.S.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Professor Song, along with the US, China is another major player in the global economy, and it recorded a minus growth, as we saw in the report, in the first quarter, which is the first in 4 decades. How does China's economic situation and that of the US affect Korea's and, going further, the world's economy?
Actually, according to the report by a statement made by the Jay Powell of the Fed chairman, at least he expected this current economic crisis will continue at least midterm, which means at least longer than 1 year, but less than 10 years, actually. So midterm means it could be a very long, relatively 5 years or 2 years, 3 years. Of course, even though the vaccine is developed and successfully developed, but that does not just revive the economy immediately at all, because already the global supply chain has been destroyed, and so many suffered from the loss of job, and also particularly some small companies cannot open the companies again soon. So that is why even though we have a vaccine, still we have a problem. And also China's the current medical situation of coronavirus is under control. But then what we have to focus on is whether the economy of China could come back very soon, relatively. But for the United States, I think it's going to continue further, longer, and because of even though the U.S. government has spent so many fiscal policy to become effective to recover the economy, it takes longer than that of China case. And the European countries I think it's just the start of some declining growth rate. Actually, Stan has mentioned that in even Russia case, the April data is not revealed yet. So we expect further and worst case will continue for the time being. And even Germany has recorded more than 100,000 cases are reported. So for Korea, currently our economy has relied very much on the trade, international trade. That is for sure. But however, and because of Professor Rodrigo have mentioned that protectionism may prevail in the coming years. So to that regard, we have to focus on domestic market, and also we have to support unemployment, because we have our government, the GDP, current government debt, given the ratio of the GDP against the government debt is very robust, 36%, even less than US and Japan, and even less than Germany. So we have buttressed the declining economy with support the unemployment, and then keep the economy running. It means that not only for the demand as well as supply should be remain within the economy. And then we have to focus on regional trade, which means, our neighboring countries such as China and Southeast Asian countries, and in north areas of Russia. So we have to increase some friendly ties with those countries and focus on the regional economic aspect. That is, I think, what we have to do in the future.
Stan, Russia has reportedly extended its non-working period to May 11th. Now, given the potential economic repercussions of such quarantine measures, I'm sure the government there has come up with countermeasures to deal with the possible repercussions then?
Yes, of course. There are some measures that the Russian government came up with. So they are going to spend about 1.3 trillion rubles, which is about $17 billion for supports for measures of economic support of its citizens and businesses, especially the small and medium businesses. And they also announced that they were planning to further expand this amount depending on the situation, how it evolves. So the economic aid package includes increased payments to unemployed people. It was almost doubled. Then extra payments to retired people, to support of small and medium businesses, just giving them cash for supporting their employees. And also government announced the tax breaks for a certain period for about from 4 to 6 months for small businesses and the most affected SMGs. Citizens, although will not get free cash from the government, but they will also get some benefits. For example, they will be allowed to pay less for housing and rent. They will be allowed not to pay their bills for a certain period of time, and they will not have to pay fine for that. And there will be also measures of support, extra support for families with small children under 5 years old. And the school children in Moscow and in some other cities, they got boxes with food and candies. So
that must have made them happy.
Yeah.
Professor Song, President Moon Jae-in has emphasized the importance of job security in overcoming the current economic repercussions of COVID-19. The government has also talked about what is proposed, a digital new deal to further develop online platforms to generate new jobs. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's one of the activities. One of the activities the government is going to make as under the name of the Korean New Deal discussion, but according to the data available right now, actually the total loss has reached 225,000 jobs are lost, but relatively this is moderate loss against when we compare that with other cases around the world. But still, it is really a serious threat, and for the Korean economy. So, in order to do that, in order to overcome this situation, government should support with because even the United States, the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has even considering the universal basic income, but our situation is better than that, but still we have to consider that because that is very to assure the people of the securities and the safety, then people begin to spend money. Otherwise, they would like to just keep the cash within their storage. So that is really bad for the economic recovery. So to that regard, what is President Moon Jae-in has proposed is considering the new job is going to take place in the e-commerce or e-learning or those areas. But currently, the public health service and the health care industry and public administrative jobs will be used, will be created to support people's job opportunity, and then that could increase the demand. Then that is going to make the company run, and the firms would have incentive to sell and produce the products. So that is a positive cycle that is anticipated. Right. So that's what I expect.
Right. We'll keep our fingers crossed for that, of course. All right, Professor Song, thank you very much for your thoughts. And Stan, thank you as always for being with us.
Thank you.
Right, that brings us to the end of this week's edition of COVID-19. Do join us again at the start of the work week on Monday for a look at Korea's systematic response to the global pandemic, which has been receiving much praise as a model standard. In the meantime, do share your thoughts and inquiries with us on our social media accounts or our homepage, arirang.com. Have a safe weekend.